Another thing to think about, and this is particularly important if you've not been taught it, because there are people around who say, well, you pull your fingers down as though you're leaning on something. If you do that, you're going to have big problems and it won't work. Because what happens, if you pull these fingers down, then what you're really doing is you're using your shoulder and your back muscles to pull. Okay, now, you would say, well, okay, they're big, they're strong. Yeah, but how do you really move them around? You can't. Another problem is that if, for instance, you pull hard on your tube, then these guys are going to go down, because really all you're doing is you're making a hook out of your fingers, and then you're just exerting some tension. And again, any of these three fingers that you make a hook on, the others will all bend too, so they'll all go down. You don't want to do that. First off, it's totally impractical to use muscles in your back and back here somewhere to try to move your fingers around. It doesn't work very well. But you certainly don't want your resting position of your fingers to be down underneath the fingerboard. Then you've got to get them out each time. That actually is like, imagine that you're hanging from some sort of a bar, an overhead bar. Okay, so you're all balanced and everything's fine. Now let's imagine you let go one hand. Then that's going to skew your balance. Then to try to get this hand back up to the bar is not easy to do at all. And that's what a lot of people end up doing here. They're hanging on with their one finger. These guys are down here someplace. So they're hanging underneath the fingerboard. And, they're really absolutely not. Let's see if I can get in a position. You see, you'd be like that. This is not the thing to do. Your fingers need to have, as a resting position, that they're hovering maybe that much above the string. And they're pressing against the thumb, which is pushing the other direction, so that your fingers have something to push against. And then when the fingers come down, they come down. Again, they're moving same sort of way as the right hand. They're moving as a unit and trying to keep curved, so they come down on their tips. And if they're not playing, then they just relax and they go back into their natural curved position, which is what your hand will do if you just sort of hold it someplace. And if they're being used, then you push down. The reason that many people tend to try to find power by pulling from their shoulders and their elbows and all sorts of other things gets back into this deal of the power grip. Because, for instance, your standard rock position is something like that. Does that look familiar? Same thing, right? Power grip. But unfortunately, the power grip, though it's very nice and strong, which is why rock guitarists use it, it doesn't enable you to move your fingers very much. And of course, it means that your little finger, for instance, can hardly even reach to the fingerboard sometimes. It certainly can't reach anything very complicated, and your fingers aren't enabled to really move around. So there's another way that human beings can hold stuff. There's the power grip, and then there's the precision grip. And the precision grip is the thing that you have to use for the left hand. And it's not as strong. It absolutely is not as strong as the power grip, for sure. And that's why people who are first starting the guitar tend to try to hang on with the power grip. They tend to try to use that every chance they get. And you have to resist that. And if you teach any people, you've got to make sure that they try to use the precision grip and keep their fingers just hovering over, so you can see, just hovering over the strings, so that they just are sitting there waiting, and probably at the same distance as the frets are apart, preferably, which is a hard thing to do too, actually. Keeping your fingers apart as much as possible is a little bit tricky, but you want to try to do it. Doing this sort of chromatic exercise, very good for the left hand. Now, you may already have a wonderful left hand, and you may already know all this stuff, but anyway, that's just an added thing to say. Now, one other factor with the left hand that's kind of interesting, that sometimes you get people who, if they're trying to stretch, the little finger will stick out, or the first finger will stick out. The reason for that's kind of interesting, that in fact, you basically have two ways of pulling your fingers up this way. If you just ask somebody to stretch their fingers apart as far as they can, they'll inevitably go like this. They'll stretch their fingers apart, but they'll also pull them back as hard as they can, which you didn't ask them to do. You just said to stretch. But they don't do that. They pull them back and stretch. This is because there are two sets of muscles that do this. There are the little muscles in between your fingers called the interosseous muscles. They're mostly on the back side of your hand, and they're the guys that make your fingers spread apart and keep them apart. And then those also, since they're on the back of your hand, they also help to pull your fingers back. And then, of course, you have the muscles back here that also pull your fingers back. Now, you could do something like this with keeping your fingers curved and stretching them apart. But mostly people don't think to do that. They just think that because they don't know they've got two sets of muscles, so they just use everything they've got. So in this stretch business, when they're trying to stretch, say, the little finger out or these two fingers apart, what happens is they tell their hand, stretch as hard as you can, and that basically means do this. Since they're using these two fingers, those don't do it, but these two do. So that's something to watch out for if you have that problem or if you see it in other people or in students. It's something to be aware of. Now, one other factor. Some people hold the guitar much more kind of flat this way, and they hold it in like so. This, I feel, is a big mistake, and it certainly doesn't work with the Presti position, and it gets your left hand in an extremely awkward position. But some people say, oh, well, I'm worried if I hold the guitar this far out, it'll fall on the floor. Now, this is something that is a real danger, but it's not a danger if you're doing things right. The thing that causes the guitar to feel as though it's going to fall on the floor is generally if you're doing this thing of pulling your fingers back and you're not pushing enough with your thumb, so you're not giving enough pressure. In other words, if you're pulling the guitar back this way and you're not pushing with your thumb to equalize that, what happens is you pull with your fingers, and what happens? The guitar starts to escape and fall down on the floor. So then you hang on for dear life with your arm, with your wrist too low, and this contributes to the playing with this kind of position, with your wrist way down and your fingers plucking in all the wrong ways. So the thing to think about is make sure that your thumb is doing its job. One other little factor about thumbs, actually, while we're talking about left hand, is if you have your fingers all on this way, you stick the thumb on, you'll notice that your thumb is sort of sideways. It isn't flat. Its thumbprint is not flat on the thing. It's sideways. It's a little bit, almost completely sideways, maybe 3/4. That's the way human beings are built. That's the way your thumb is. It basically is opposite your fingers in a sideways position. It doesn't turn this way. So don't try to have your thumbprint flat on the fingerboard. Just have it sideways the way it was built. God meant it that way, and we're stuck with it. So anyway, that's another thing to consider. And you want to just use it to counteract the pressure of your fingers coming down. So I think that's pretty well done. And doing that should give you a good Ida Presti position. If you have any questions, send me an email and let me know.